Okay, so what we're doing now is reviewing the anatomy of the brain. So what I'm going to try to do if I have time is for videotaping the class, and then I put the video on YouTube, so if you need to watch the stuff to review it, or if you miss a class or something. It takes a while to get it up there, so I'll do the best I can to get up as much of it as I can.
Can you talk about that?
We have the office print out the class notes. Are they going to be the old class notes or the?
The first part of the class, like I said, is pretty much the same. All the cranial nerves and that stuff. Maybe there's a few different pictures, but we can print out the setting out the newer stuff. Yeah. But if you go online right now, for the second half of the class, it's going to be. It's not that many things that are changed. It's just a little bit. But obviously, we'll try to get as much as we can with the newer version. It's not that much different. Okay, so the basal ganglia, and then different. So you have in the brain. We're going to be dividing it into. We're talking about sensory and motor. So if you remember, motor is going to be descending tracts, and sensory is going to be ascending tracts. Okay. So then you have this the thalamus. It's here. That's kind of like that's more to do with sensory. So that's where the sensory information is processed. As sensory information is going up, it kind of goes through the thalamus and then out to the cerebral cortex. So what it's made up of is has the caudate nucleus, the putamen, and the globus pallidus. And mostly has to do with motor function in the body. So it's regulated by the extrapyramidal system. You have the pyramidal system and you have the extrapyramidal system. And the extrapyramidal system receives input from the cerebral cortex, the brainstem, and the cerebellum.
Do you? Oh man, there is one in here. I called Cindy for.
Okay.
Do you need the Word document or the PowerPoint?
Probably.
Okay.
Let me see.
Yeah, I got it. I have two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one.
Okay.
So then there's an association with the basal ganglia and the substantia nigra. And the basal ganglia is with posture, automatic movements, and more controlled or skilled movements. So it kind of modifies the input of the motor system going into the muscles in the body. Yeah, I can go back. So the globus pallidus, the putamen, caudate nucleus, and then here's the substantia nigra, and then this is the cerebellum here. That's a particular formation. What's that? I'm not sure about that. I'll have to check on that. Okay. So I'll make a note to check on that. So then you have the diencephalon. Okay, those are things that have the word thalamus. Okay, so you have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the epithalamus, and the subthalamus. also the pineal gland. So that's more in the center part of the brain here. That's going to be like in this area, and it's going to be down below it. Okay, so this is the thalamus, and then down below you have the epithalamus and the hypothalamus. And like I said before, is that whenever you have sensory information, it's coming from the perimeter of the body, and then it goes into the thalamus eventually, and then from the thalamus it goes to the cerebral cortex. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Because in a general sense, in the motor system, you have two neurons from the cerebral cortex to the end organ, which is usually going to be a muscle. And then it synapses in the spinal cord. Whereas in the sensory system, usually you're going to have three neurons. So one neuron in the sensory organ, and then it's going to go to the spinal cord. So that's the first neuron. And then the second neuron goes from the spinal cord to the thalamus, and then from the thalamus to the cerebral cortex. So then there's other connections that are going to increase the different types of sensations that you're going to feel. So the thalamus and the limbic system, that's where you're going to have emotions that go with your senses. A certain sensory stimulation is going to trigger emotions, and that's where it's going to go to the limbic system. Okay, so then the thalamus and then the anterior central sulcus of the cerebral cortex, that's where you're actually having the sensory system of the body. Because if you remember on the brain, you have the, okay, so this is the frontal lobe here, and then the occipital lobe here. And then you have the parietal lobe, and then you have this is divided by the central sulcus. Okay, so sulcus are the grooves, and gyri are the bumps that stick up. Okay? So you have the central sulcus between the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe. And then you have the precentral gyrus, and then the postcentral gyrus. Okay? And then the anterior part, that's going to be sensation, and then the postcentral is going to be motor. So then also if you have the postcentral gyrus, then that's going to have to do with location of the location of pain. So then here's just basically some more stuff about the brain. So you have the forebrain of the cerebrum, then you have the cerebellum, or also called the hindbrain. Any ideas on what's going on with the AC?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Ian, any idea what's going on with this? So was it something right here?
I'm just going to go.
Because the setting you want to put it on usually is auto, right? So now you have the brain stem, and then in different higher developed animals versus lower developed animals. The lower developed animals, everyone's pretty much always going to have a brain stem. Okay, it's just when you get into higher functioning, like humans and things like that, you have the cerebral cortex. So the brain stem is what controls the more basic functions that you need for survival, like your respiration, your heart rate, things like that. And then also, most of the cranial nerves, the nuclei, are in the brain stem, except for C1 and C2, which are higher up into the brain, and the 11 cranial nerves in the cervical spine.